welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. In today's episode, Brielle Nickoloff, a conversational designer, discusses different scenarios for conversational designers. Brielle also explores how we all have idiosyncrasies with our speech and why designers need to take this into consideration when creating a conversation tree. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, Brielle. Welcome to The Future is Spoken.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to host you on this podcast. And today we're going to talk about use cases for voice-first interfaces. But before we jump into that, could you tell listeners and viewers a bit about yourself, your experience, and maybe your academic background as well?
Sure. I studied linguistics and neuroscience in university. So I've always been very fascinated by language and how we process language. And I began my career as a voice designer. So really just working with voice-first interfaces like Google Assistant and Alexa, and really laid the foundation for what I know about conversation design first with the voice-first world. And so afterwards, I joined Botmoc, which is where I am now. Botmoc is a tool that conversation designers can use to build out chatbot flows or voice-first flows, and I'm their product manager. So my job is to help create a tool that will really empower all of us in the design community to build the way that we think, not have to rely on tooling that is more technical or developer focused, and help power the next generation of conversational experiences.
That sounds really interesting. And going back just quickly to one of the first roles that you had, when you say voice first and voice design, is that synonymous with conversational design?
I like to think of voice design and chatbot design as under the umbrella of conversation design. So,
okay.
Yeah, I consider IVR, voice first, and chatbot design to sort of be under the category of conversational design.
Oh, what's IVR?
Sorry?
What is IVR?
Oh, yes, IVR is interactive voice response design. So it's like the telephone trees that you hear when you call into a big company and you go down the path to get led to information you're asking for, an agent or something like that.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. And as you said, they come under the umbrella of conversational design. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so in your role now with Botmoc, it sounds like they have a product. So is your kind of focus, is it like continual improvement?
Yes. So our job at Botmoc is to create the Figma or the sketch or envision of conversation design. So we have a great, robust tool that lots and lots of designers use right now, and there will always be things to improve upon it. So a lot of what I do is asking other designers about their process, asking them how their experience with Botmoc is, and if they could have anything in the world in the tool, what would it be? And sort of trying to refine the tool to make it something that will work for everyone who's building for WhatsApp or Twitter or Alexa, anything that's a conversational experience.
I see. And you touched on, when we began our interview, Brielle, you said that you were really curious about language and how we communicate. What other personality traits do you have that you feel have enabled you to be successful in this role, in this field?
as I mentioned, it sort of stemmed from a fundamental passion for language, and not necessarily in the sense of loving to write. I did like writing, but I was never that interested in making that something I do all the time. But I was more fascinated and always just thinking about how people are saying something, or why they said it like that. And that's really what linguistics is. It's more about looking at the patterns in language, and becoming a pattern identifier is one of the most important things that we do as linguists. So when I was in college, there was an elective that popped up that was called conversation analysis. And really all we did in that class was sit around a table, watch a transcript of a video, a recording of, people talking, whether it was somebody bringing shoes into a shoe shop to repair it. We would look at basically the 45-second interaction between the person bringing the shoe and the storekeeper, and just look at every minute detail of what was going on. And it's interesting because you don't even, we're such natural conversationalists that it's second nature to us to speak. And so there are all these amazing ways that we communicate that we don't even think about. And one thing that I remember from that interaction was when you bring something up to a checkout counter, you don't say, I'm ready to check out, please. Here you go. Oftentimes you'll just set it on the counter, and that's the first conversational turn in a way. And then you're in such a specific context that the rules are already sort of understood. And so much of language is not even verbal, right? So I just remember being in that class and thinking, there are people out there that really study this. They study the art and science of simple conversation. And it's such a huge world because it's not sort of this super, it's not like a recipe that you'd imagine, like one person says a greeting, one person responds with another greeting, and then you introduce the topic of conversation and then you respond. It's not really, sometimes it's like that. Oftentimes on telephone calls, it's like that. But in so many other contexts, we are just naturally aware of how to communicate. And so, yeah, I think that was the first thing that drew me into wanting to think about this all day, to think about conversation all day.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is fascinating, isn't it? And I suppose one of the interesting things is that you're going to find cultural differences and differences even within a country. Like where I live in Canada, people say that it's much friendlier out west, and people meaning like the western provinces, and that people might have that kind of encounter that you described, but not be in a rush. They might put the milk on the counter and chat for a bit. Whereas in Toronto and probably in Washington, D.C., where you are, there's a bit more of a rush feel to everything, yeah? So you've got those elements to take into account when you're doing your work.
Absolutely. And as you just alluded to, there are cultural linguistic differences. There are obviously different languages in the world. There are dialects. There are ways that your own family communicates with one another. There are ways you communicate with your partner. And again, we're so attuned to these different contexts that it's like second nature. But when we start thinking about robots talking, that context isn't second nature to them. And that's one of the reasons conversation design is a design discipline. We really have to put a lot of thought and time into making conversations not necessarily human-like, but at least natural enough to get the task at hand completed in the most efficient way for that person.
Okay. And when we're talking about designing these things, I guess we're narrowing it even down further, not just like the cultural references, but to the need of the organization. So the focus becomes even more specific, and yet at the same time, the organization, I would imagine, has to consider its customer base could be very diverse, couldn't it?
Absolutely. We actually have a term that linguists use called, the term is idiolect, and it's the idea that not only are there, languages, dialects, and accents and all other kinds of ways of speaking, but every individual has their own dialect in a way. So that makes things, obviously, if we were to design for every single person's idiolect, it would be impossible. But there are ways to find patterns in specific situations where a person may be attempting to get X task done, and we, as conversation designers, as linguists, we can use our pattern identifying powers to sort of set up that conversation, whether through voice or chat, in the most useful way.
That is really interesting to think that everybody, has their own unique. The word that you used was idiolect. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, almost like idiosyncratic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah, and I would imagine those influences come from what, your psychological makeup and other things like that.
Yeah, well, it's made up of really who you spoke to and how you were socialized linguistically growing up, the groups of people that you were around, really how you have learned to communicate with the world around you.
Now let's kind of jump into the meat of what we want to talk about today, and that's use cases for voice first interfaces. Can you give us some examples of use cases and maybe what was involved, the challenges, the rewards, and what listeners / viewers could learn from these use cases that you're going to present?
Sure. So one of the most fun things about voice first use cases is that they'll always stem from this very unique affordance that voice can only give us. So instead of being locked into the digital screen-based world like we have for 20-25 years at this point, voice is the first kind of interface that is helping us break away from that. And it's not that one is better than the other, but it is finally helping us carve out very specific scenarios that will help us design for the best way a user can actually do something. So sometimes calling in to someone is the fastest way to do something. Sometimes texting someone is, and sometimes a quick voice in, audio out interaction is the best. And when I think about use cases, it's always about the physical environment that the user would be in. We sort of start with that and say, why in this scenario is a voice-only interaction the best way to go? And sometimes it could be because the user is driving a car and you don't want them to have to use their eyes for something. Sometimes it's because you're walking into the house and your hands are full of groceries and a baby and you need the lights to be turned on, and voice is the easiest, simplest way to get that done. Maybe it's that you're running on a treadmill or outside even, and you want the song to change without having to dig out your phone and press next. That way you're having to employ your hands and your eyes instead of just speaking into the air and having it be done. And so it really always stems from what the physical environment of the user is, and of course, what task they're trying to get done. And once we start critically thinking about those in combination, then really amazing use cases start to emerge.
So those are the two starting points then. What is the best way to do it, and what task needs to be done?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And so once you've answered those questions as a conversational designer, what happens next, Brielle?
So once we are able to hone in on some specific pain point or task that needs to be achieved, and we have decided that voice is the best way for this to be handled, we can start to brainstorm different ways that that can be achieved. So, for example, of course, with turning the lights on, that is a simple interaction that doesn't need much fluff around it. If I'm saying, Alexa, turn the lights on, I might want a bit of a confirmation, because if, for example, the light bulb burnt out and I don't hear anything back from Alexa and the light didn't turn on, I'm going to be like, what's going on here? I don't really have anything to go off of to troubleshoot. So, but I don't necessarily want some long rambling response like, sure, Brielle, I'm turning the light on for you right now. Here you go. Like, that's also really unnecessary. So a lot of times a simple ear con, which is just a little, it's like an icon, but something that you hear, is great in situations like those where Alexa would say like ding, and then that way if nothing happens, I know as the user that she believes she did something, but nothing happened. So now I have sort of a starting point to troubleshoot with.
Because I'm assuming that Alexa wouldn't know if in fact a light bulb had gone, or is she white? No, okay. So yeah, you need to know that she's performed the action, because if you have to problem solve, is it Alexa or is it the bulb that needs replacing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so once you've kind of got into that stage of like responses, etc., what do you do next?
Well, next we have to test it. So if we as a company have decided, I once worked on a product that would be a mealtime adventure for kids. And of course, we had to do a lot of research before that to figure out, okay, this brand is coming to us. They want some presence on Alexa. And who are their users? What could their users possibly be interested in engaging with? Where would they be interested in engaging with an Alexa experience with this brand? All kinds of questions like that. And through that research, we were able to hone in on one case of helping parents and kids connect at mealtime without a screen, because a lot of parents were reporting that they would sit their toddler down in front of an iPad just so their kid would eat without really thinking. And the parents reported having a lot of guilt about this. So our goal was to create some kind of screen-free experience that would be fun, engaging, somewhat educational, and once we were able to hone in on A, that use case, and B, where they're going to be accessing it, C, why it's good that it was voice first without any screens, we started building out different flows, which included things like songs, adventures like here's the choo-choo train, like the parent would be able to feed the kid and follow along with some sort of audio adventure. And And after that, we had to test all these different features to see what the kids liked, what the parents liked. Ultimately, if the parent finds it really annoying, they're not going to use it. If the kid finds it boring, they're not going to use it. So a lot of research before and after, and ultimately grounding this product in a lot of research about why a voice in, audio out experience was the best, really helped us be successful with that particular experience.
That's really interesting. And you're taking into account people's feelings about it as well. You mentioned that feeling of guilt. So that's important as well. People's emotional response to a voice interface. Yeah. Now, as a conversational designer, what things do you find challenging or even difficult about the creation of a voice first interface? And then what things are really rewarding?
Great question. There are a lot of challenges that we're still working on. So, of course, almost everything that we create is going to be deployed on some popular voice assistant at this moment in time. That will probably change at some point, but right now we have to be working within what Alexa's rules are and what Google Assistant's rules are. And those can include everything from constraints on how you name the experience, constraints on what somebody would be saying in order to invoke that experience. It includes things like not being able to have the mic on for long periods of time. So in order to protect people's privacy, the mic on Amazon Alexa will not be able to stay on for a long period of time. And if it is, then you have to let that user know, which introduces a lot of friction into the experience because that's another conversational exchange that has to be done. Something like, cool, I'm going to start the game for you. And instead of just starting it, you have to say, is it okay if I have the mic on for the duration of when you're answering? And then the user has to say yes, and then you can start. And that may seem trivial, but as conversation designers, we think very hard about every single conversational pair or exchange between the robot and the user, because every single time there is an exchange, that's a chance for things to go wrong. It's a chance for some response from the user to be misheard or misrecognized. It's there's a lot of things that you're taking into account, and it ultimately just takes up more time from that user. So we're always thinking about those things, and then
just sorry to interject. Wasn't that the reason behind those privacy violations, that the mic didn't switch off and those conversations were heard between husband and wife?
I do recall that maybe last year or 2 years ago. Yeah, I think it was some sort of situation where on Google Assistant, some hacker had figured out how to keep the mic on for a long period of time.
Yeah, and there was a case, it might be quite a few years ago, and I think it was even in Britain, where it was not long after Alexa had hit the market, and it recorded some personal conversation. Yeah, and people at Amazon or on the Alexa team were able to hear it.
Right. Ultimately, when it comes to privacy, you're always thinking about how to indicate what is going on to the user, because this is an invisible experience. It's not like having an entire screen laid out in front of you and being able to see the options and being able to see the privacy policy and all of that. It can't really be communicated in the depth that we can with a visual interface. So we're always sort of walking that line of being explicit about what sort of information we are receiving, and not fatiguing the user by reading off a 15-minute long privacy policy.
Yeah, that will put someone to sleep, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, play it at night before you go to bed if you've got insomnia. Yeah. So, yeah, those are really important considerations and challenges. And on the reward side of things, Brielle, where do you see the reward for yourself and others in conversational design?
So when it comes to voice, it's particularly rewarding for me because it really is bringing us back to the original interface, which is verbal communication with each other. And again, we're not trying to recreate a human necessarily. Some people might be. But the way I think about it, we're really just trying to, again, identify the ways that technology can assist us and aid us. And if that doesn't have to require a screen, and in fact, a screen would be the preferred option in that case, then making an experience that is so seamless and works amazingly with just a voice first interaction is a huge achievement. And we're so, sometimes it can be hard to get ourselves out of the box of just thinking in terms of screen based interfaces, and working within the confines of a voice only exchange is very challenging for a couple of reasons I just mentioned. There are lots more reasons why it's challenging, but in, for example, the case with the kids on the Mealtime Adventure, that was the only sort of solution that would have made sense in that scenario, when parents did want a way to entertain and connect with their kids during dinner time, but didn't want to have to feel like they were hurting their kids in any way by feeding their addiction to the iPad.
Yeah. And yeah, I suppose it would be really rewarding once you have something that's functioning successfully, and it's working well, and the user is happy with it, because you have so many challenges to overcome that we've discussed earlier. You know, the nuance, the accents, the service that's required, all those things, as well as the privacy issue. So there's so much that you need to take into account even before you start working on the actual project.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any other cases of voice first interfaces that you feel would be interesting to listeners that you'd like to share? Anything that comes to mind?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. Are there any other use cases for voice first interface that you feel users might find really interesting if they're thinking about going into conversational design?
Sure. Yeah, let's see. I'll try to think of some specific examples. Again, I always come back to thinking about where a user is physically located and what are they currently occupied with. So, for example, when there are some really interesting use cases around mobile voice first experiences, like walking down the street. There are some fascinating, like, geo-sensitive use cases. If you can picture, so I live in Washington, D.C., and you can picture a kind of experience where you're walking along the National Mall and you're able to maybe ask your AirPod what happened here, and it could play Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. That is truly the best way for that information to be delivered, because a speech is so grounded in that person's voice and emotions. So And also you're walking down the path, so you don't want to be having to look at something necessarily if you can just listen to it. So yeah, it's really all about why speaking is the best, why listening is the best, and what other situations the user might be in, like having their hands full or being mobile or anything like that.
Yeah, that example that you gave, that is really good. You can see just a massive amount of use in museums or historic monuments, things like that. Kind of takes me back to the days. Well, I'm older, so I can remember like the pre-digital age, and I can remember going to an exhibition at the Royal Ontario Museum, and I think it was William Blake, and we all got a massive cassette recorder with a headset to carry around, and something like that being replaced with digital, it would be much easier to use and probably less intrusive. Yeah. So lots of use cases. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're sort of reverting back to audio, but in a way it's in such a new environment because we now have experiences that can understand us, which has never really been the case before Alexa came out. And like I mentioned earlier, interactive voice response systems have been around for much longer than that, but those have always sort of been a speak to click sort of model versus a system that you can actually ask questions to and hear answers back.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. You're right. It is really interesting the way we're going back to audio, but in a new way. Just the appetite for podcasts, even. It's just quite phenomenal. It reminds me of how our grandparents and great grandparents must have felt when they first listened to the radio. It was kind of like right there in your living room, right in your house. It was, you could listen to the president's or the prime minister's voice, so incredibly powerful. I think people have forgotten that a little bit because we've been so consumed with and absorbed with the screen visual.
It is powerful, and it's fascinating to think about podcasts and again their specific function. I think bringing it back to sort of the channels, that the senses that we use to engage with any kind of media, like you said, for television you're taking up the visual channel and the audio channel, and in some cases I actually love watching television with my roommates because we can sort of talk while it's going on and we don't lose the context or the thread of what's happening because we still have the visual channel to rely on. But with a podcast, it's almost impossible to listen to that with someone else if you want to have a conversation about it while you're listening.
Yeah, you can't, can you?
No, you really can't. So there will be, I'm already sort of seeing in my life times that I really want an audio only kind of experience, and times where I really don't like watching television by myself actually, because it's sort of like more of a social experience for me. But when I'm cooking in the kitchen by myself and I can play a podcast, then it's sort of a very singular experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too. Now we're kind of 6 months into the pandemic, and the number of people who said, I don't want to watch any more television. So, I think more and more people will be turning to audio, because I read that we're not even halfway through the pandemic yet. It could go on for like 18 months. So, the developments in audio and voice first interfaces, it'll be very interesting to follow during this time.
Absolutely. And voice first interfaces are the perfect option for trial for trying out interactive podcasts and interactive audio adventures, interactive voice games, all kinds of things like that.
It sounds very cool. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Brielle, before we finish our interview?
No, just thanks for the conversation. It's always, I love being able to go back into the voice first world and relive sort of my own excitement about this, and think about the trajectory that we're on in terms of computers that can really understand us. And granted, we're not quite there yet. Of course, a lot of voice design is sort of hardwiring the experience so that we account for every possible thing that could happen. But we're definitely moving into an era where the systems will become a bit smarter and the designers will be not necessarily writing out every single possible thing that the system will say and the user could say, but more or less sort of molding the conversation around different scenarios and use cases, and having that system be able to generate language on its own instead of just reading off a script. So thanks so much for the conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. I've really enjoyed it. It's fascinating to think about what could happen or what could be in the future. And I'm sure you'd agree that for anyone thinking about taking the voice interaction design course at the Digital Assistant Academy, it's definitely going to be an interesting and exciting career path if you do decide to choose it.
Absolutely. It's growing in leaps and bounds, and we're finally, all of us, the whole industry is finally waking up to the idea that we do need voice designers, we do need conversation designers. It's not just a given that anybody can, do this. And it's not necessarily a developer's job either. So we need developers to be working on this, designers, because those are two full-time jobs, and there's absolutely an amazing future for conversation designers.
Yeah, that's great. And I can certainly appreciate what you're saying about you need the conversational designer. It is a specialist skill. Mm-hmm. And it would be a bit short-sighted to look at it and think, well, conversation, everyone has conversations, anyone can do this. That's simply not the case. It's incredibly intricate, and it requires a lot of thought as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think that's why that's not the case, because it's really hard to kind of take ourselves out of the context of being expert conversationalists. It requires a really analytical mindset about what conversation really is. So
yeah, and how someone might respond or how they might feel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, Brielle, it's been lovely speaking with you, and I'm sure we'll connect again in the future on another episode of The Future is Spoken.
I hope so too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Take care. Enjoy your day.
You as well.
Thanks for listening today. Remember, you can find all the information on how to become a certified voice interaction designer, along with show notes and more, at our website, digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. We encourage your feedback and questions, so be sure to get in touch by using the contact page at the Digital Assistant Academy's website. We'll include the link in the show notes. In our next episode, we will explore the challenges of creating human-like conversational abilities with Jason Gilbert, a lead conversation designer with Cocoa Hub.